All right, last kind of major topic I want to talk about today is that of animating text. Now, you guys did a lab, or you did a lab and a project where you dealt with text. We know how to do basic transform properties. So, I could take this text and I could move it, or I could scale it, or I could play around with opacity, right? And I know you guys at this point know how to do stuff like that, but you'll notice that you're only if you're affecting the text as a whole, right? Like you're affecting the whole word or the whole sentence or the whole paragraph, whatever happens to be within the text. But what if you wanted to be able to like animate the individual characters? You know what I mean? Um, Add a little bit more interest to them. So we need a way to do that. And what we're going to do is we're going to learn about what's called a text animator. And what text animators allow you to do is apply things like transform properties like position, scale, rotation to individual letters and let you kind of animate those individually. So the way this works is if you were to highlight, this is exercise 18, if you were to highlight text, you could scroll down to where it says text animator and say add animator. You could also go under animation, add text, animate text. These are kind of preset ones. I'm going to click on this and let's start with position. Okay. So I know it says rotate. We'll get to that in a second, but I kind of want to explain what this is. So when you another way to do it, by the way, I believe you can I go under here? Yeah. You can go under, if you have a text, you can go under animate, and there's another option to do that. So when you apply one of these text animators like position, like rotation, you're going to get something called, it's going to call it an animator. And you'll notice that what happens is in this case, it was a position change. So this is my text as it is now. You can see that I can change this in the horizontal or the X or the vertical and the Y. Let's just say for the sake of argument, I want this to go 50 pixels. I think that's down. Is it down? Yeah, 50 pixels down. Okay. Now at the moment, this doesn't seem much different than a normal, transform property. But what I could do is under range selector, notice how it says start and end. Okay, what does that mean? Well, this is the start. Let me use a different color. This is the start, which is the start of your text, and this is the end. Okay. And so you can say how much of this is being affected. And in this case, I'm going to affect the whole word. And then there's this thing called offset. So what offset means is whatever the text is now, how much of that is going to be affected by the new text animator. So offset at 0 means basically all of my letters are not being affected. But if I were to set it to 100%, you can see how each individual letter went up 50 pixels. Okay. So how we could do this is we could animate this. I could animate the offset. Maybe I want it to be 2 seconds long. So from 0 to 100, or sorry, 0 to 100%, each individual letter within my text is moving up 50 pixels. Okay. Now, maybe I wanted to go down. Okay, then I would change the position from positive 50 to negative 50. And then you can see that in this case, the text is going down 50 pixels per letter. Okay. Now you'll notice that it's going for each individual letter, right? Every letter here. Maybe let's just say for the sake of argument, I didn't want it to affect every letter. This is where you could play around with start and end. If I take the end, see that red line, right? I'm going to set it to 50. See that line right there? That represents what's being affected. So really what I'm saying is I'm only going to affect from 0 to 50%, which is this. So I'm only really going to affect the first half of my text, whatever that text happens to be. So now when I do this, you can see that, oops, this is going off. All right. All right. I'm going to remove this and let's add in a rotate one. I'm going to do rotation and I'm going to have the letters rotate about 30 degrees. Okay. So what I'm going to do is say, okay, let's start at negative 100, which means nothing is being affected. And then after 2 at 0, that's when each letter is going to have that rotation. Okay. I could have also done it the other way where it should have been this is going backwards as opposed to going forwards. So in this case, I kind of wanted it like a negative offset, so it kind of, oops. Oh, except I didn't go to 0. Let's go to 0. There you go. Once again, if I didn't want every letter to be affected, let's do 50%. You can see it only affected the first half. So you don't necessarily have to affect all of your lettering. Let's go to Animator 2. All right, let's try the same thing. Once again, we're going to do a scale. I'm going to select the text and let's go to Animate and let's go to Scale. So once again, it's like, okay, this is what we want it to become. I'm going to set it to about 150. So each letter is going to eventually become 150. I can set this to a negative, so it means it doesn't have this effect. And then at 0, that means the effect's being applied. It's going to go in chronological order. Boom, 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 boom. I could also do it the other way, where this is positive 100, and it does kind of in reverse. Once again, if I didn't want every letter to be affected, maybe I just wanted the second half, I could do start 50%. So that means it's only going to affect, or it should only affect the second half. Now, in this case, when I scale up, it always scales either in chronological or reverse order. We can also do kind of like random lettering. And you can do that under advanced, where you could set this to random. And so now when I do random, you can see how it doesn't always do every letter exactly in order. Okay. So if you wanted something a little bit more random with how it works, a randomness could work. I'm going to remove this. Maybe we try that, let's say that we were going to do this with the rotation. Actually, let's do opacity. So once again, it's like, okay, let's say this is what we want it to be in the end. It's going to start at 0. This is what it is starting off, and then offset to what it is. You can see how it's scaling, where it's doing opacity kind of chronologically. But what I could do under advanced, we could also set this to random on, and that means my letters would randomly kind of scale up as opposed to. Okay. All right. Let's do a little bit more. So, that was going up. I was scaling like letter by letter. You could also do it word by word. So let's try, I'm going to do that opacity and set this to 0. And I'm going to set this to 0. Okay. And we're going to animate this from 0 to 100%. So this is what it's starting off as. And then, over time, each letter is going up by that. Now, let's say instead of going by letter, I wanted to go by word. Once again, if we go under advanced, instead of based on characters, you could set this on based on words. And so now when it does this, you can see that words are being faded up as a whole as opposed to individual letters. Or you could do it by lines. So I have 3 lines here, and you can see entire lines of text could be done that way too. You can even apply things like a blur or tracking. So if I did tracking, remember tracking is the space between letters. You could do something like this. So you can see that maybe I'm going to start. Actually, let's start with a high tracking, which means lots of space between my letters. And then maybe that'll come to about a 0, something like that. You can play around with color. So I'm gonna change my text color from red to green to blue. Get some interesting effects here. This might be one of those where it actually might be better if you applied it to maybe multiple lines of text. So let's actually add a second animator. I'm gonna do that by hitting animator add property. Let's do fill color. And we'll change from red. That's kind of fun, where every time it gets a new word, it's putting in the color. as it's uncovered. But maybe let's keyframe that and then have it go to purple or blue. So it starts at red. You can kind of see that, and it's kind of going to a blue as it kind of moves on. So it's kind of interesting there. Oops. It's the last one. Yeah. Um, shoot, I thought we had this. Must have not have saved it, but anywho, we can also play around with blur. So for instance, like if I did a blur, it's going to start off blurry, and then each letter will become in focus or less blurry. Okay. Maybe might even, combine this with something else. Maybe like a I don't know, skew maybe. So not only is it being affected by the blur offset, but it's also being affected by the skew offset from regular to normal. Maybe might even apply like a little bit of a scale. So let's do a scale. Let's do like 115. And so like not only is it changing the not only is it affecting the blur and the skew, it's also affecting the scale. So this is what it starts off as, and then after the offset, it goes from back to its original or its default. Okay. All right. So hopefully this gives you some ideas of like things you can do with text, make some interesting things here. I want you guys to try that out. That was 16, 17, or sorry, 18. I don't know where the lines are here. 18, 19, 20, and 21, please. Okay.